Episode 1, The Storm Before the Letter. The rain beat against the window like a warning, but it wasn't the storm Emma needed to fear. It was the unopened letter waiting for her at home, the one that could change everything. Inside the cozy coffee shop, the world was a blur of warm lighting and soft murmurs. But Emma couldn't escape the storm brewing in her mind. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard of her laptop, but the cursor blinked back at her, mocking her inability to write. It had been days, no weeks, since she'd been able to put more than a few words on the page, and the pressure was unbearable. Her editor's last email echoed in her mind, taunting her like a distant thunderclap. "We need something fresh, something real. Can you still deliver?" Her fingers dropped to her lap, and she slumped in her chair, staring at the empty screen. She had nothing. Her well of creativity had run dry, and she was terrified of the inevitable deadline. There was no magic left in her words, no spark of inspiration to reignite her passion for writing. Her eyes wandered out the window, watching the rain fall in a torrent, streaking the glass with lines that seemed to blur the world into a chaotic mess. She felt the same way, stuck, trapped in a cycle of doubt and frustration. Maybe I should have just stuck with teaching, she thought, her stomach twisting at the thought of what ifs. At least then, I wouldn't be this close to losing everything: her career, her confidence, her sense of purpose. "Emma?" A voice broke her from her spiral, and she looked up to see the barista holding a cup of coffee, her usual order, a dark roast with a splash of cream. "Thanks," Emma muttered, taking the cup, though she felt no warmth from it. She sipped absently, her thoughts still tangled in the mess of her writer's block. As she set the cup down, her phone buzzed in her bag. A quick glance at the screen revealed a message from her best friend, Natalie. "Are you coming over tonight? I miss you." Emma sighed, slipping the phone back into her bag. Natalie had always been the optimist, the one who insisted on pulling Emma out of her shell when the world felt too heavy. But tonight, Emma wasn't sure she could face her. She didn't want to admit how lost she felt. She didn't want to explain how her life had come to a screeching halt when the words she'd once poured out so easily stopped flowing altogether. The storm outside raged on, but Emma had already made up her mind. She had to get out of the shop. She needed to be somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't drowning in the weight of deadlines and expectations. She grabbed her bag, threw a few crumpled bills on the table, and made her way to the door. The cold, damp air hit her like a slap in the face as she stepped outside. It was the kind of cold that made your bones ache. She barely registered the cab ride home, her mind consumed by the unease gnawing at her chest. What was it about today? Why did everything feel like it was coming to a head? And then, when she arrived at her apartment building, her eyes immediately fell on the letter wedged in the mailbox. A heavy, cream-colored envelope with no return address. Just her name, written in elegant, flowing script. Her heart skipped a beat. What the hell is this? Her fingers trembled as she took it upstairs, the weight of it far too heavy for something that should have been an ordinary piece of mail. She tossed the rest of her mail onto the dining table, barely sparing it a glance, and turned her full attention to the mysterious letter. As she slid her finger under the wax seal, the clock and ivy design caught her eye. A symbol she didn't recognize, but somehow it felt important. A sense of gravity clung to it, as though the seal was meant for her alone. She carefully peeled the seal away and unfolded the letter, its parchment soft and worn, as if it had been waiting for this moment for decades. The handwriting was flowing, almost elegant in its meticulous care, the kind of handwriting that suggested a story behind it, a story just for her. Dear Miss Emma Hart, if you are reading this, then the path has found you. You may not believe in destiny, but it believes in you. Within the walls of your family's old estate lies a story only you can uncover. Trust your instincts, and know that some connections transcend time itself. Yours in faith. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea who L. Aldridge was, but there was something in the words that made her feel like she had been transported somewhere else entirely. Somewhere deeper, darker, and more meaningful. The Hart estate. Her grandmother's words rushed back to her in a flurry of memories. The Hart estate has secrets, Emma. Someday, you'll uncover them. She felt a strange chill crawl down her spine as she held the letter in her hands. What secrets? What story was waiting for her at the estate? She hadn't been back there in years. The sprawling mansion on the outskirts of town had been left to her 2 years ago, a decaying relic from a bygone era, one she had never had the desire to visit. Her grandmother had always spoken of it with reverence, as though it held some sacred power. Emma had thought it was just the ramblings of an old woman, but now, she wasn't so sure. The thought of the Hart estate made her stomach turn with a mix of dread and intrigue. What was I really inheriting? She laughed nervously, trying to shake off the rising anxiety. There was no reason to be afraid of a house, no reason to give in to the mounting sense of foreboding. But as she read the letter again, it was hard to dismiss the feeling that something far bigger was at play here. The next morning, Emma stood in front of her apartment window, staring at the hazy morning light filtering through the clouds. She had barely slept, the letter still fresh in her mind. Something about it called to her, like a beacon in the fog. If her editor wanted something fresh, perhaps she needed to find it in the very place that had always been part of her past, yet distant from her present. Maybe it's time, she thought, a spark of curiosity igniting deep within her. Maybe it's time to face whatever secrets the estate holds. With a quick decision, she packed a bag and made her way to the car. The rain had stopped, but a thick fog clung to the ground, turning the familiar world into something unfamiliar and strange. As she drove through winding roads, she found herself fighting the overwhelming feeling that she was being pulled into something she couldn't control, something that had been waiting for her long before she ever thought of it. The Hart estate loomed in the distance as she drove closer, and as she approached, she could see the crumbling walls, the Gothic spires stretching into the gray sky like skeletal fingers. The vines crawling up the stone seemed almost like tendrils reaching for her, inviting her into their grasp. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, Emma wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever lay ahead. But as she stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, the key her grandmother had given her felt heavy in her pocket. It fit perfectly into the lock, turning with a creak that echoed through the still air. Emma stepped into the shadowy hall of the Hart estate, the door creaking closed behind her with an ominous groan. The air was thick with dust and secrets, and every corner of the house seemed to whisper her name. Her heart pounded as she glanced down the darkened corridor, feeling an unsettling pull toward the forgotten parts of the mansion. But as she ventured further, something caught her eye, a glint of silver at the end of the hallway, where a door stood slightly ajar. With hesitant steps, she approached. The closer she got, the stronger the feeling that she wasn't alone. A shiver ran down her spine, and as she reached for the doorknob, a sudden chill swept through the room, making her breath freeze in her chest. Was it the wind? No. It was something else. Something alive. Emma's hand shook as she pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges drowning out the pounding of her heart. And there, on the other side, waiting for her in the darkness, was the last thing she expected to find. Something, or someone, that would change her life forever. Next episode. Stay tuned for episode 2, The House of Secrets. The journey has only just begun.